This is where everything took a sharp turn for the worse. We crept quietly through the house, making our way to the utility room at the back door. The yard was overgrown, and the night was still deathly silent. The moonlight barely illuminated us, and we kept our flashlights off while we were outside so Sarah, the ghost girl, wouldn't know we were out there. Yasmine turned to us and said, "So when we get in there, where should we look?" "The basement," Vanessa whispered. Looking at the world through the camera lens, the eyes could be in there. There were some kids' toys in there. I think the killer liked taking souvenirs from his victims. He must have had more than the 4 they found in the basement. The eyes could have been kept as a souvenir before he decided to kill himself. My heart raced as we snuck our way around the side of that house towards the back door of the Eye Ripper house. We were actually going into the basement for a 3rd time after everything that happened, and I hated it more than anything. But I knew that I wasn't going to stay in that room with Zach, not just because I was afraid of looking like a coward, but also because the general atmosphere felt so ominous with him around, even more than usual in this ghostly realm. We went through the back door, and our tensions were the highest there. We quietly padded down the hall towards the kitchen. I stopped the two and asked shakily, "What if that boy is in there again?" "I think Bryce just pissed him off. Maybe he won't hurt us," Vanessa said hopefully. "So far, no one has really gotten hurt." "We don't want to test the theory," though, John said doubtfully. "We'll be in and out, quick and quiet," Yasmine assured me. It didn't help ease my frayed nerves. John put a finger to his lips to shush us as we carried on. The basement door loomed before us like a gateway to hell. We opened it and shined our flashlights down the stairs, with the beam barely touching the floor beyond the last step. We didn't hear or see anything from our vantage point, so John took the first step, followed by Yasmine, followed by me, followed by Vanessa. It felt like walking into a lion's den. And not only that, but knowing full well that the lion hadn't eaten in a long time. When we descended the flight of steps, the basement seemed devoid of life, and it somehow felt creepier than if another entity was down there. "Hurry," I whispered, immediately starting to search for anything that might look like it could possibly contain decomposing children's eyeballs. I didn't know what that would even look like, maybe a morbid keepsake chest. Everyone started looking as well, shining their flashlights around and spreading out, a frenzied urgency in their movements. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder to make sure that monster wasn't looming over me again, especially when I bent down to check inside the furnace, which definitely seemed like a place someone would get rid of remains. I didn't even think about the fact it would be ash. My brain was too focused on ensuring I wouldn't be ambushed by something that looked like the kid from The Grudge. Strangely enough, though, a teddy bear was inside, old, worn, and full of dust and soot. It looked familiar. I grabbed it and studied the plush, trying to think of where I'd seen it. Wait, the picture. When I'd looked up the Eye Ripper case online a week ago, this exact bear was being held in the arms of Millie Jenkins, the girl in the purple dress. On Wikipedia, I read an article about her, and one of the photographs included there was of her cuddled up next to her mom on a couch during Christmas time, and she was clutching that bear to her chest. It was unmistakable, with orange button eyes, a cute, tiny smiling mouth, and a red plaid body under its chin. The belly looked like it had been stitched poorly. The sewing work was abysmal. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears as I took my fingers and yanked up the seams. As the sounds of my friend's shoes scuffing the ground while they explored the dank basement became white noise, I forcibly ripped open the hole inside the teddy. There was a little sack inside, tied at the top by a string, something like a sachet with a texture similar to a potato sack. It absolutely reeks. My nose scrunched up, and I held it away from me. "What the fuck?" I said so, gaining everyone's attention. "What is that?" Vanessa inquired, coming over quickly to film my findings. John and Yasmine approached too. "I don't know." I noticed the bottom of the sachet was darkened with the stain of a long dried substance, something viscous enough to not disappear when the fabric wasn't wet anymore, like water. With quivering fingers, I pulled the string and opened the bag for everyone to see. John shined his flashlight down in it. "What the hell is that?" Yasmine sounded befuddled. Inside, there were 2 black, shrunken little things. They were very clearly the origin of the smell, and they looked like grapes, olives, or blueberries that had aged 1,000 years in the sun. "Wait a second." I dropped the sachet and backed away, becoming aware of the horrible truth. "Are those eyes? Are those her goddamn eyes?" Holy fuck," Vanessa breathed, her bottom lip trembling. "That's actually what eyes look like when they're decomposed. I saw it once on an animal that died on my grandma's farm. They become these little black things." "Fuck's sake," with a free hand, John lifted his shirt over his nose. "That's sick." You guys, Yasmine's face was a mixture of horror and excitement at the revelation, if that was even possible. "It's terrible, but we actually did it. We found the eyes." "We found a pair of eyes," I corrected her, "and he hid them in Millie's teddy bear. I saw a picture online with her holding this exact one. It's definitely not a coincidence. If we want to appease all 4 of the victims, we need 3 more pairs of eyes," Vanessa realized with immense dismay. Oh, gross, John gagged, backing away so he couldn't smell the rot. I tied the sack back up. I guess you can hold on to that, Grace. Gee, thanks, I rolled my eyes. Everyone, keep looking, Yasmine urged. We gotta. Our walkies crackled, and we all stopped to listen. There was silence for a few moments, as if someone was holding the button to speak but choosing not to say anything. After a bit too long of waiting for them to speak, John raised the walkie-talkie to his lips. Zach, Bryce, are y'all okay? He whispered. It felt like the world was still for a few tense moments, as if it had stopped spinning and we were frozen in time. John Bryce's quaking voice whispered through the speakers, you guys need to come back right now. What's wrong? Yasmine pressed, panic flashing over her face. Bryce whimpered, his breath ragged, as if he were truly scared for his life. There's something wrong with Zach. I think an unexplainable sound interrupted him, and the walkie stopped making a static sound. The hell, I spoke, feeling fear gnaw at my chest. Before anyone could say anything else, the walkie crackled back to life. John Zach's voice was quiet and emotionless, sounding nothing like the emotional and energetic Zach we know. It didn't sound like he was calling him as much as he was just stating his name, as if someone had asked what his friend's name was, and he was answering robotically. Zach, the fuck are you doing to Bryce? John roared. Yasmine, Vanessa, and I leaned in, listening closely. I glanced over my shoulder to make sure there was no ghostly spectator. Where am I? EUS? Zach asked, his voice warping towards the end of the sentence, like an old doll with a voice box broken from age and wear and tear. It deepened in pitch towards the end, like he was an old machine slowly powering off. Give TM back, K. What the fuck? John screamed. We all looked at the walkie-talkie in horror. Yasmine picked up her walkie. Bryce, where are you? There was no answer. Is that really Zach? Vanessa whimpered, her eyes bulging nearly out of her skull. Shit. John ran for the stairs, and Vanessa and Yasmine followed right after him. I immediately ran after them, all of us sprinting towards the basement door, which we'd left open for an effortless escape, desperate to save our friend. The door slammed in John's face, and he immediately shook the doorknob, trying futilely to open it. It's locked, he yelled, the panic in his voice contagious. Oh my God, Vanessa despaired, no longer holding the camera up to her eye. We're going to die. Break it down, Yasmine demanded, her face soaking with sweat. Use that jock strength. Back up, John said. And we obeyed, right before he started kicking at the door. It rattled on its hinges with each thrust of his sneakers. He then stabilized it with his shoulder and repeatedly hit it. I watched him and prayed inside my mind for the God my mom always preached about to save us from this nightmare. Then I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and an unwanted presence was dangerously close to me. I turned around in a flash, a gasp ripping from my throat as I shined my flashlight on Millie Jenkins' pale, eyeless and dead face, every horrifying detail inches away from me on the step under the one I was standing on. The way her eyes were like the deepest holes, like she had nothing but a void back there, no flesh or anything. The bit of blood rimmed her eyelids, the way her mouth was pressed into a tight line, like corpses whose mouths were sewn shut at the morgue. The others turned to look, and the staircase was filled with a chorus of everyone's mortified screams. I could hear the door creak and their feet shuffling as they all fearfully pressed themselves against the basement door to be away from the entity. On the other hand, I couldn't seem to break eye contact with those two bone-chilling hollows, twin abysses staring back at me. I could somehow feel her terrible aura, which shrouded her. It felt like despair, rage, and longing radiating off her form like heat from an oven. Then her arm was suddenly outstretched towards me. I didn't see the gradual movement of the limb. It switched positions in the blink of an eye. Her hand was out, palm up. Feeling as though I were on autopilot, I dropped the sachet into her palm with shaking hands and recoiled. Finally, the ghost of Millie Jenkins, as if a puppet pulled away on invisible strings, floated backwards, swallowed into the cavernous darkness behind her. I felt her presence leave. It was like a dozen weighted blankets being lifted from my chest. John tried the door again, and it opened. We rushed out into the kitchen, breathless and weak on our knees. I felt like I could barely stand. You did it, Vanessa stared at me impressed. You gave that creepy little bitch back her eyes. Dude, Yasmine reprimanded her. What? Vanessa whined. It's not like she can hear me. Clearly she moved on. 1 down, 3 to go. We need to get back. Right now, John reminded us as he hastily ran for the back door. We followed behind him and retraced our steps to the second house's back door. If that little blonde girl Sarah was still at the front, we did not want to be noticed by her, not without having her eyes at least. As soon as we were inside, we ran straight for that bedroom upstairs where we left the two, not caring how much noise we made. When John opened the door and we all filed in, it felt like my heart would explode in my chest from the anticipation. But the sight we got wasn't what we expected. Bryce and Zach were standing there looking back at us, seemingly completely fine. Sure, their stances were rigid, and their eyes were wide with an unwavering gaze like a scared animal, but they seemed relatively unharmed. John sighed and crumpled in relief, rubbing his face. "Dude, what happened?" Yasmine asked. Me and Zach played a lame joke. Bryce expressed disinterest. "Sorry," Zach said, not even cracking his usual annoying smile. "That's not fucking funny," Vanessa yelled at them. "We thought something terrible was happening." The two didn't react. They simply stood there and stared. John seemed to find it as weird as I did. "Are you all good?" John asked skeptically. "You're being all weird." "Well, anyways," Yasmine impatiently said before they could answer. Grace, like a complete badass, gave one of the ghost kids back their eyes, and they like ascended or some shit. I was right. We just need to find where that sicko hid their eyes. He kept Millie's in this little bag and hid it in her toy bear like a creep. We waited for their reaction but got none. So I began awkwardly. "Zach, are you feeling better?" "Yeah," Zach said flatly. "I wonder if the other eyes are in the basement too," Yasmine said, turning to me and ignoring the two boys. "We didn't have time to check because of their unfunny little prank. We should go back." "Let's go outside," Bryce spoke, his voice sounding weirdly hollow like Zach's. "Vanessa, you come with me." "Yasmine, you go with Zach." "Where are we going?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, and why is she going with you and not me?" Yasmine's voice was rife with suspicion and jealousy. "I know where to find some eyes," Bryce replied simply. "Me too," said Zach with the smallest of nods. "We should go quickly." "Ooh, wait a sec," John said as Zach and Bryce stiffly walked out the bedroom door into the upstairs hallway. "We just got back from outside. Can we just catch our breaths for a moment?" "No," Bryce said without turning around, leading Zach downstairs. We watched them befuddled in the hall. Something was very, very wrong. I turned to Vanessa, John, and Yasmine with a stern look on my face. "I don't trust this," I whispered. "Follow my lead." "Okay." "It's my boyfriend," Yasmine started. "I don't care." I held a hand up. "If I'm wrong, I'm wrong, but at least let me find out." I quickly went down the stairs before they could stop me. Bryce and Zach had already made it to the front door and were looking at me expectantly. "Where are our friends?" Zach asked in a robotic way. "They're coming." "Let's go outside and wait for them," I said, opening the door. No sooner than their shoes hit the pavement of the cement walkway, I slammed and locked the door. "Grace," Bryce stoically said on the other side. Grace, Zach echoed him like a lifeless parrot. Then, a slow thudding against the door. Knock, knock, knock. Too patient, eerily calm. Vanessa, John, and Yasmine watched from the top of the stairs. I looked back at them. My eyes were haunted. If they were acting normally, they'd be swearing at me and screaming to be let back in. So what's wrong with them? A fresh wave of tears fell from Yasmine's eyes. "I don't know," I admitted. "Please, let's just go back upstairs and think for a while." I ascended the steps, refusing to dwell on our situation's hopelessness for at least one blissfully ignorant moment. "But what if those things harm them?" John argued as I brushed past him. I stopped. "I don't think that's them anymore," I replied without looking back, and then entered the room again. Yasmine instantly started to weep bitterly, darting down the hall and slamming herself into a separate bedroom. Vanessa made no sound as she recorded John and me standing there, our expressions crestfallen. As he moved past Vanessa, John shoved the camera lens away from his direction and went into the other bedroom by himself in the opposite direction. His door slammed too, making me flinch. I looked at Vanessa. She looked back at me through the camera, not saying a word. I went deeper into the room and asked, "Are you coming in or not?" Vanessa wordlessly followed me inside and gently shut the door, still holding the camcorder up to her eyes. I sat on the bed and gave her the dirtiest stare I could muster. "Why are you not talking to me or looking me in the eyes?" She ignored me, opting to lean against the dresser with the mirror as she recorded. "Answer me," I said. She crossed her ankles and gently kicked her feet back and forth, as if this were just a regular day. "Answer me." I picked up an old-fashioned alarm clock from the nightstand and threw it at her. She dodged, and the mirror was shattered. She stood up and backed into a corner, her breathing becoming uneven, as if I were the crazy one. I got up from the bed. "Vanessa, I swear to God," just like Yasmine had earlier, I lunged for the camera, and she shrieked in a wild sort of rage and valiantly fought me for it. I fell back, dragging her to the moldy carpet floor with me, and we wrestled with it, rolling around and grunting, squirming and writhing, slapping and pushing, our faces red and perspiring with effort. Finally, I pried the camera out of her hands, which felt like peeling gum off the sticky suction cups of a squid's tentacles. She jumped at me for it, and I held it out of reach, like my bullies did with my comfort toy back in elementary. When it became clear she wasn't getting the camera back, she sank to the floor and sobbed into her hands. "Why are you doing this?" I snapped at her. "Because I don't want to be here," Vanessa wailed, finally providing an answer to my question. "When I have the camera, I feel like I'm not here." I stomped over to her and kneeled down to her level. "Enough," I replied firmly, coping like this isn't working. "Whether you're watching behind a screen or not, you're here, and that won't change unless we get our shit together." Vanessa wiped snot from her nose. Yaz and John aren't here, and no one's trying to fix anything anymore. And we have fewer people to help without Bryce and Zach, and more people to worry about hiding from, too. We just need to give Yaz and John some time. Okay, I put a hand on her shoulder, and she nodded. "You look tired. Why don't you go take a nap and I'll stay up and keep watch?" Vanessa wiped dust off the old flowery comforter and lied on her side in the bed, pulling the drawstrings of Bryce's hoodie so that the hood closed tight over her face and only left her nose poking out. She was cold, but she didn't want to get under the covers, it seemed. And I didn't blame her. These houses were full of all kinds of bacteria. I decided I would give everyone maybe an hour, and I made sure to check my watch. It was 12 a.m. I looked at the camera in my hands and decided to go through the footage so far. I sat in the corner by the window, making sure the volume was extremely low so that the noise wouldn't disturb Vanessa. I had to hold my hand over my mouth to muffle my gasps and squeaks of frights as, at several different intervals during the recording, I saw glimpses of the ghost children hiding just within frame. They went unnoticed by us during the filming, which was a hard pill to swallow. How do you not notice a young boy with big gaping hollow sockets staring at you from a corner of the room? How do you not notice an eyeless little girl behind you, running past like she was playing a game of tag? But that wasn't the most disturbing thing I had noticed, not by a long shot. The footage reached the time where we frantically entered the room to find Bryce and Zach acting weird. As soon as they came into frame, the footage distorted for a split second with static appearing on screen, then went back to recording like normal. That wasn't the worst part, though. The worst part was that in the vanity mirror, I noticed something that made all the blood drain from my face. How we hadn't noticed before, I had no clue. I rewinded and paused the recording at the right time frame. The mirror reflected Zach and Bryce differently than we did. Their reflections had no eyes. Story 2. Their reflections had no eyes. Just empty, black sockets. It wasn't a split-second frame either. Every moment where the camera caught their reflections, they appeared to have no eyes. The reality began to set in. I had been suspicious, but I hadn't known it was truly that bad. If anything, I thought the real Bryce and Zach were somewhere hurt, and these were just copies. The truth was, they were eyeless wraiths, just like the 4 victims of the Eye Ripper, their spirits corrupted by the evil here. Soullessness hurts, that's what Zach had said. Zach fell victim to that boy in the basement, and then Bryce fell victim to Zach when we left them alone together. They wanted to lure us outside so they could jump us and take our eyes like their eyes had been taken. It was like a zombie infection type of thing. If your eyes were ripped out in this ghastly place, you ended up a monster as well. Forced to haunt a limbo, looking for something you may never find, driven to mutilate living people despite it not doing anything but spreading the torment like a virus. I was determined not to end up like that. I wondered if any of us had looked at the mirror at any point, would we have seen the lack of eyes in the reflection, or was it only visible on camera? We were so distracted, of course, we didn't look at the vanity. I shuddered as I imagined what it would have felt like to discover such a horrifying thing with Zach and Bryce still in the room with us. However, where were their bodies? If Zach was truly dead, why hadn't we found his corpse in the basement? Same with Bryce, why hadn't we found his corpse in that room? Whatever the case, after seeing this, I wasn't willing to waste another moment sulking or grieving. I was going to gather everyone and search for more eyes. I had a feeling I knew how, too. I stood up from the corner with the intention of rousing Vanessa to ask her questions about the Eye Ripper case when something caught my eye. The window. The curtains that covered it had a small sliver of space open between them, and I saw a pale nose almost flush against the glass pane. Fear struck me like a lightning bolt, and I yanked one side of the curtain open to reveal a different ghost boy. The one in the basement had black hair. This one had brown hair and a little blood smudged under his nose. His head immediately shifted ever so slightly, so his hollow eye sockets were facing me. His little hands were pressed against the window. He looked like he was in a crouching position. It suddenly hit me that we were on the 2nd floor. "I'm going to find your eyes," I desperately tried to reason with the thing. "So please leave me and my friends alone until then." "Okay." The boy stared at me with an emotionless face. Then, his lower jaw unhinged, turning his mouth into an O shape, and a puff of vapor ghosted from between his white lips and fogged the glass. Slowly and mechanically, he used a finger to draw a pair of eyes in the window. They were shaped like lemons with big irises and little pupils. I nodded eagerly, thinking I was getting somewhere with this. "Yes, yes, your eyes. I'm going to give them back to you." Then, with his finger, he erased the details off the eyes he drew, including the irises and pupils, until it looked like 2 darkened ovals. Mimicking empty eye sockets, I frowned. I knew the implication. but I wasn't sure if this was a threat aimed at me or if he was showing what had been done to him. I shook my head, not knowing what to say next. The boy simply crawled up and over the window, towards the roof, scaling the wall like a spider. I closed the curtains again, feeling myself tremble. That interaction didn't instill me with any hope at all. I could hear him crawling on a part of the roof above the room we were in, and it freaked me out, but I tried to ignore it as I continued my course of action. Could they get into the house? Yasmine said locked doors don't deter ghosts, but maybe she was wrong or these were a different type of ghost. She told me about ghost categories in the past. Some of them follow the rules of the physical world, like being able to be hurt with blunt force. In any case, they clearly knew where we were. I woke Vanessa up and said, "We need to start trying to escape. I have to ask you some questions about the 4 kids." She rubbed her eyes and sat up, loosening her hood. "Like what?" Millie's eyes were hidden in her teddy. I began to explain as I paced the room. So I began to wonder, are the other eyes hidden like that? "I dunno," she shrugged. As her teddy noted as missing in the report, I asked. "Yeah, the articles and news reports all mentioned she went missing with her stuffed bear," Vanessa replied. "Did the other kids go missing with any objects?" I chewed my lip and thought. "Yes, actually," Vanessa perked up. "Peter, the black-haired boy in the red shirt, went missing with his school backpack. Oh, and Sarah's little purse she got for her birthday was with her when she was kidnapped and wasn't found anywhere." "What about the other kid?" William the First began to grow hopeful. Let me think." I could see the cogs turning in Vanessa's head. "Damn, I don't think I remember William going missing with anything other than the clothes on his back," she sighed. "We'll figure that out later," I said, ignoring her concerns. "Right now, we're going to be looking out for that backpack and that purse. It's like you said, serial killers keep souvenirs. Those items were what the kids were last seen with, so he kept them for himself. And I guess he saw their eyes as souvenirs too, so he placed them inside those things. If my theory is right, I hope I'm right at least." "So you think they're in the basement?" She looked nervous. "That should be the first place to check," I nodded. "After all, the last time we went, we didn't know exactly what to look out for. And that basement is like the inside of a hoarder's house. Do you remember seeing anything like that down there?" She shook her head no. "What's the color of the backpack and purse?" Vanessa fought hard to remember. The backpack was a dark color, something from back in the day, and I don't remember the exact color. The purse was pink. It matched her shirt. I remember that much at least. "Great, we just have to get Yaz and John and go back there. Then we'll only need one more set of eyes." I marched towards the door. First, I went to John's room and opened the door. He was lying on his side on a twin bed, facing the wall. It looked like it had once been a little boy's room, but the boy in the old photograph on the floor wasn't one of the victims. Vanessa saw me looking at the picture. The neighbors moved out not long after the murder, she elaborated. They were very hush-hush about it and wouldn't answer any reporters' questions. I think they started to realize that this place was becoming like it is now. John the First called to him. "Walking over, we know how to find at least 4 other eyes. We just need to go back to that basement. I know it's scary as all hell, but we made it out just fine last time, and this is the only way to escape with our lives." He didn't answer me or move a muscle, and I sighed, wondering how I was going to get him to comply. Vanessa pointed. "Shut that window. Why is it even open?" I looked over to see that indeed the window, halfway obscured with dark blue drapes, was wide open. Damn it, I went over and shut it, fairly fed up. "John, be a man and get your ass up." I started to feel uneasy as he refused to move. I exchanged a nervous glance with Vanessa. His stillness reminded me too much of the ghost children, and I could feel the air thicken with tension. What if one of those entities had entered through the window? I slowly crept over to his bedside, steadily reaching my hand out then. I yanked his arm towards me, pulling his body onto his back. I expected to see him emotionlessly staring at me like Zach and Bryce had, but instead I saw red-rimmed eyes, a snotty nose, and cheeks glistening with tears. He wasn't a ghost, he was simply crying and ashamed. "Leave me alone," he pulled away from me. "Don't you want to get out of here?" Vanessa asked with frustration. "Stop wallowing and get up." I thought she was hypocritical, but I didn't say anything. Fine, John pushed himself up and wiped his tears away, but I'm not going back to that basement. "Then where are you going?" I asked as he stood up. "You know those other 2 roads?" he asked me. "The ones that don't lead back to town. I'm going to try one of them. Even if they don't go back home, maybe they go somewhere far from here." I groaned. "You can't be serious. You think only that one road was affected by the curse here? You'll just end up right back here. You 2 can go hunting for rotten eyes as much as you want," he snapped. "But I can't stay here. I can't." Man, he rushed past us. "Wait," I called after him. "Zach and Bryce, remember. I'll go through the back door," he called back. Whatever, my face felt hot from anger. Let's go get Yaz, she won't abandon us. Vanessa and I went to the room where Yaz had run to. She was standing at the window, peeking out through a crack in the blinds at the front yard and street outside. The moonlight made her brown eyes sparkle with tears, and she seemed both pissed and depressed as she scanned the area for any signs of those wraiths. She didn't look up when we gently opened the door. Yaz, I said softly so as not to startle her. Creeping forward, we gotta go, I have a plan. I saw an adult Yasmine replied emotionlessly, and I could hear her swallow from across the room, as if she were forcing bile back down her throat. What Vanessa and I said at the same time, and looked at each other. She was back to holding the camera and recording, but her eyes were looking over the screen at my best friend, hope glimmering in them. An adult Yasmine repeated, her gaze not leaving the window. It was a woman, and she was standing beside that house over there, she pointed. Just by the woods, so still I almost didn't notice her. So someone else is trapped here. I tried to wrap my mind around this. Stuck between thinking it was unfortunate for another person to be stuck in this dreadful place, but also being happy that we weren't alone. Truth be told, I was exhausted at playing the role of leader and wanted nothing more than a grown-up to make all the difficult decisions for me. Yeah, you can say that she still didn't look at us, but she's not alive like us. She had no eyes. My heart plummeted to the bottom of my stomach, and the look on Vanessa's face told me hers did the same. So Vanessa began. The kids aren't the only ghosts here. No, Yasmine shook her head, sounding numb. I thought of something and patted my pockets. I pulled out the phone I had found earlier, which was now fully charged from my power bank, and turned it on. I was met with the faces of two smiling women as the home screen. The camera was the most recent app to open at the bottom. I clicked on it and discovered a video from a year ago. As I played the video, I heard Vanessa approaching my side to see what I was doing. Frantic breaths and whimpering sobs immediately blasted from the speakers. If anyone sees this, one of the women from the home screen had her sweaty, terrified face extremely close to the camera. Tell my mom that I love her. Tell my fiance that I'm so sorry that I couldn't come back to him. My name is Lisa Waller, and I'm a journalist. I heard rumors about this place, and the distant sound of a twig snapping made the woman's head snap away from the camera. We could see that she was in the woods, somewhere around this terrible street. The camera shook as she stood up and started running. They won't let me leave, she desperately screamed as she ran for her life. If you're here and you're listening to this, you need to find what's left of him here. That boy, Will, he was the last and he got free. He ran into the trees, but the killer caught him. His parents are part of the occult. He started this, I just know he did. Please, I don't want to be like them. Jesus, I whispered, Vanessa in silent shock, as she looked over my shoulder. Yasmine still hadn't moved from her spot, but she stared at us, unnerved. It's her. It's Rachel, the woman cried. She doesn't have any fucking eyes, and she's been chasing me for hours. There was another minute of panting and thundering footsteps before. Nuo, stop, Rach. Suddenly, the camera was now focused on the ground as the woman dropped her phone and screamed gutturally, followed by a wet squelching sound and a resounding thud that shook the camera a bit. She was silent. Then feet walked into the frame, wearing sandals. The phone was picked back up, and we gasped as the camera focused on the eyeless corpse of Lisa Waller, sprawled over the forest floor. Your sacrifice won't be forgotten, a woman's voice hollowly said from behind the camera. I screamed as the camera flipped to the face of the other woman from the home screen picture, deathly pale with two gaping voids instead of eyes. She raised two bloodied, torn out blue eyes in front of the camera. Please come here, she pleaded to us in a quiet voice, almost as if she could see us. If the body rejects the soul, we have to hunt again. We need you. Don't be afraid. We watched in horror as the specter brought the camera into the basement of the Eye Ripper house, her breath and the sound of her footsteps eerily absent from the video as she traveled quicker than what appeared normal. The closer she got to the basement, the more the video glitched out, freezing and cutting forward by a few seconds. We could barely tell what was happening. It was dark and clearly the file was corrupted. Then finally, her grotesque face again, barely visible in the darkness. Why didn't it work, she asked so quietly that we nearly couldn't hear her. I can feel myself becoming nothing. What am I? Then it ended. With jittery fingers, I dropped the phone, feeling as if it was still connected to that horrifying spirit and wanting to be rid of it entirely. It wouldn't help us anyway. There was, of course, no way of contacting the outside world, and I wasn't concerned about evidence at the moment. That phone and the pack of half-smoked cigarettes I swallowed, everyone who's come here ended up like this. That's why those were there. They're things left behind by people who died here. Who knows how many things were in that abandoned basement before? How much of that actually belonged there? I just couldn't seem to process it. It all felt like a terrible dream. I knew it was weird, Vanessa started as she licked her lips, that some people who've been going missing the last few years were heard talking about visiting this place. How is that possible? I hounded her without meaning to. My stare was intense. Didn't that raise any red flags with anybody? It did, but whenever people came investigating, there was no sign of them being here. None at all. Vanessa's eyes glazed over as she spoke the horrible truth. I've read all about it. The police always ended up saying it was more plausible they went missing on the way here because they never found any evidence the missing people even made it here. It's almost like this place just ... erases all of it. Hid is it? I turned to Yasmine. We know how to stop this. We just need to find an old school backpack and a pink purse. It should have 2 of the kids' eyes in it. It's like a curse. If we get rid of it at the root, the victims of the eye ripper, I'm sure it'll set off a chain reaction, and then everyone will be free, dead or alive. This isn't a fucking movie. Grace, I was shocked by Yasmine's hardened tone and the way she stared at me. What you're doing is called wishful thinking. What I looked at her like she was out of her mind. Stop it. You saw how we survived the Jenkins girl. She turned her eyes back and left, and we haven't seen her since. She's gone from here. She's been appeased. And listen, there's something I need to tell you both. They looked at me curiously. I took a deep breath and broke the terrible news about what I had seen on the camera. They didn't believe me until I told Vanessa to rewind to that part of the footage, and they saw it for themselves. Oh my God, Yasmin choked out, clamping her hands over her mouth and closing her eyes as more tears escaped her. We were talking to them. We were talking to them, and they were dead the entire time Vanessa ran her quivering fingers through her hair. So they're just walking corpses, Yasmine bawled. Zombies or something. What the fuck is this place? She looked like she wanted to have a breakdown, both of them did. But I knew I couldn't afford to let them do that if I wanted to go through with my plan. We couldn't afford to waste any more time grieving. Listen, I said, shaking Yasmine's shoulders gently to snap her out of it. We can't stay here and cry, we have to. Those 2 women fucking died here, didn't they? Yasmine was suddenly invading my bubble, almost nose to nose with me with an irritable glare. What if you're wrong and we have to appease them too? What if there's a lot more than just them? How many people do you think tried to tour the house where one of the worst murder cases of the state happened over the last several years? Yaz, this isn't you. I shook my head. You're optimistic, strong, and suggested finding their eyes first. I'm also the one who brought you all here to begin with. Her voice cracked, and the furious expression on her face melted into one of deep sorrow. The idiot that got Zach and Bryce, John's friend and my boyfriend, killed. She turned away, refusing to let us see her wipe off her tears. Don't sell yourself short, Yazzie. Vanessa smiled and stepped forward, putting a hand on my friend's shoulder. You didn't know. In an unexpected turn of events, Yasmine spun around and planted a powerful smack on Vanessa's cheek, stunning her. You 2 timing bitch, you think that means anything coming from you? Her hoarse voice shrilled. Keep it down, I shushed her, putting myself between the 2. Yasmine shoved me out of the way, cornering Vanessa. I know you've been messing around with my boyfriend behind my back. Everyone said you were the easiest girl in school, a real skank. But I didn't listen, and I got tired of seeing your pitiful ass being left out all the time. So I made you my friend. Vanessa started crying. Afraid of being the object of Yasmine's wrath, I cowered away and meekly said, Look, this isn't the best time to do this. Let's get out of here, and then you can tear her a new one. The last thing he ever did to me was turn his face away when I tried to kiss him. Yasmine grabbed Vanessa's throat and pushed her against the wall. Her fingers didn't tighten to strangle her, but rather they simply pinned her in place. All night you 2 were acting like you were the ones dating. He's dead, and I can't even remember him as a loyal boyfriend. As I watched this unfold and saw Vanessa pathetically weep without even struggling, a fire started to burn in me. I always let Yasmine get her way and let her drag me into things, and I was sick of being submissive. I wasn't going to stand there and let her devolve everything into chaos after I worked to keep us all in this together. Our lives were in danger, people were dead, and we didn't need this petty high school drama. Get your hands off her, Yaz, I shouted as I pried my friend's fingers from my rival's throat. Yasmine looked at me, shocked. There's no time for this, I added, a quieter voice. Things are trying to kill us, and this is what you're worried about. Look, I'm sorry to say it, but I had already told you I thought Bryce wasn't suitable for you. I mean, I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but it needed to be said. And Vanessa has always been a jerk, so I don't know why you ever expected anything from her. Vanessa rubbed her arm up and down awkwardly, clearly disliking my insult but not having the guts to protest about it. You're better than this, I said, pushing Yasmine's dark hair out of her face. And I'm sure if Bryce were here, he'd tell you he was sorry, however genuine it may be. I rolled my eyes. And after this is over, you can dump Vanessa as a friend and never have to speak to her again. You must stay calm until then so we can leave. Yasmine didn't interrupt my stare for a few moments. Finally, she sighed and murmured, Okay, so what are we doing? Going back to that basement and finding a pink purse and a backpack that may have belonged to Sarah and Peter, the first replied, relieved she was behaving herself. They likely have their eyes in them. It's worth a shot. Fine, then let's do it. "Let's do it and get out of here." She walked out of the room and suddenly turned to Vanessa to jab a finger at her face. "And after this, you're back to being a loser slut." Vanessa didn't answer, but by the look on her face, she seemed hurt, despite her own betrayal. As we went down the hall, I explained John's absence to Yasmine, who seemed exasperated that he had truly left on his own on a futile suicide mission. And then we gathered our courage to leave that house, which had seemed like a safe haven. We went downstairs, our steps quiet, and towards the utility room where the back door lay, a white solid door and a screen door behind it. In the right-hand corner of a small rectangular area where a washing machine, dryer, and pantry were located. I was in the lead, and I silently opened the first door. The screen door's window revealed an overgrown backyard, drenched in darkness and barely lit with moonlight from a full moon. At this time, you should have been able to hear the nightly cacophony of nocturnal insects, maybe even seen fireflies, but there was no sign of life whatsoever. It felt like someone had hit the mute button of the remote on the world, just as you would to a movie. I hated it more than anything else, as it made it feel all the more lonely. The girls are right behind me. I tried to open the screen door as quietly as possible, but since it was aged, rusted, and weathered, it would not yield without sound. The hinges squealed, and the door's groan increased in pitch and volume as I eased it outward. We all cringed visibly, with Vanessa being at the back and looking over her shoulder, and Yasmine and I peeking around the backyard, which hadn't been tended to in quite some time. There was no one there, dead or otherwise. We stepped onto the cement doorstep one by one, and then our feet tread long in dead grass, which should have been teeming with bugs but wasn't. We crept to the edge of the left side of the house, where several feet of wide open space lay between us and the Eye Ripper house's back door. We would be vulnerable, shadowed by the treetops, but still highlighted by moonlight and uncovered by any building. Anything could catch us, and we had to work our nerves up before we could even think about making a run for it. I peeked around the corner of the wall to be sure the street, or at least how much I could see of it, was empty. What came next happened so fast it makes my head spin just thinking about it in the present. First, a scream rang out from Vanessa and Yasmine, and I followed her terrified gaze over to the tree line at the edge of the backyard. Right away, I noticed the pink shirt and long blonde hair. Sarah Miller's ghoulish face was soaked in shadow as it stared lifelessly at us. She was so still that she might as well have been a doll, made to stand upright between two trees. My mind shifting to autopilot as the scared animal inside me yearned to get as far as possible. I turned to run, only to be face to face with the visage of the eyeless brunette boy, William. I felt his fingers dig into my eyes, and I blindly shoved him away with a shout of pain and ran. I was heading for the Eye Ripper house, and I could hear Vanessa and Yasmine screaming as they followed me. The back door was getting tantalizingly closer. Then it opened, and Zach walked out. The illusion was broken, and it was very clear to us that he was missing his eyes as well. What he was doing in the house, I had no idea, but as soon as he saw us, his face balled up, and he burst into tears while charging at us. The tears were made of blood, and his mouth stiffly moved with his whimpers as his sockets narrowed from being pushed down by his furrowed eyebrows. The car, Yasmine screamed, grabbing my hand and dragging me towards the street. Grace, Zach called, his voice on the verge of breaking with emotion, but he was not quite there yet. I couldn't take my eyes off him as he flailed his arms outward while running to catch up with us. I got away, his voice heightened in pitch with a sense of deranged euphoria, and he smiled. "Thank Christ I got away." "I did. I got away, Grace, I did." We were almost to the car when Vanessa shrieked as she got yanked backwards by Bryce, who wrapped his arms around her neck and face with his fingers wriggling for her eyes like worms. She closed her eyes and tried to force his hands off her, crying in terror. Yasmine pushed me towards the car and launched herself at him, wrestling him off of Vanessa and tackling him to the ground. I hurriedly climbed into the driver's side of John's car as a crying Vanessa scrambled backwards on the asphalt, watching my friend fight the ghost. Seeing her in this state, I got out of the car and grabbed her under her arms, pulling her into the driver's side seat. "Come on, Vanessa, hurry," I screeched, white-hot panic flashing through me at the sight of all the wraiths we'd encountered heading right for us. Zach was running clumsily like a madman, Sarah was gliding forward an inch off the ground, and William was crawling and scrabbling along the pavement like an oversized spider. Once Vanessa was in the seat, she closed the door, and I was about to get in myself. But I turned to see Yaz still struggling with Bryce. He stuck a finger and thumb in her right socket, trying to pluck her eye out, and the still night air was filled with cries of pain. Quickly, I yanked Bryce off of her by his hair and shoved my fingers into his eye sockets, hoping to stun him. It felt freezing cold inside and wet, but when I took my fingers out, they weren't wet at all. "Don't leave us," Bryce begged, his voice flowing out of his gaping mouth without his lips moving. He slowly stood up. "We need you." Just as the others descended upon us, I helped Yasmine to her feet, and we scrambled into the car, shutting and locking the doors behind us. We were now trapped, with eyeless wraiths surrounding us, including our former friends. They put their hands against the windows and pressed their faces into the glass, making sure we felt their hollow stares piercing deep into our beings. Then, after a short while, Sarah was beside my window, covering her face with her hands again, but facing me as if she were ready to play a game of peekaboo with a baby. William chose to crawl up the vehicle's hood and onto the roof, his face frozen in an expression that reminded me of the ghost face mask. He simply crawled around up there without stopping. Then, Peter, as if he'd been told fresh eyes were for sale by the others, was standing a few feet away from the car and simply watching intently. Bryce and Zach paced in slow circles around us, meandering with emotionless expressions. We all refused to look at them, instead choosing to either look down at our laps or at each other. Vanessa let the camera go limp in her hands as she buried her face in her lap, giving up on recording for the time being. Yasmine pulled her hood and sweat jacket over her head and covered her eyes with her hair. I looked up at the car's ceiling, thinking about my life choices that had led me here. Then, after a short while, Sarah was beside my window, covering her face with her hands again, but facing me as if she were ready to play a game of peekaboo with a baby. William chose to crawl up the vehicle's hood and onto the roof, his face frozen in an expression that reminded me of the ghost face mask. He simply crawled around up there without stopping. Then, Peter, as if he'd been told fresh eyes were for sale by the others, was standing a few feet away from the car and simply watching intently. Bryce and Zach paced in slow circles around us, meandering with emotionless expressions. We all refused to look at them, instead choosing to either look down at our laps or at each other. Vanessa let the camera go limp in her hands as she buried her face in her lap, giving up on recording for the time being. Yasmine pulled her hood and sweat jacket over her head and covered her eyes with her hair. I looked up at the car's ceiling, thinking about my life choices that had led me here. "We have to escape," Yasmine suddenly said after a while, turning to look at me in the back seat. How I asked without looking at her, annoyed at her just saying the obvious. "I'm also open to suggestions," Vanessa said as she watched William crawl from the roof down the rope and down, for the 100th time. "I'm gonna lead them away," Yasmine replied, making us both gawk at her like she was crazy. She noticed our looks and sighed. "I've thought about it long and hard, and I'm going to make a run for it. My plan is to run around one of these roads to distract them long enough. That's insane," Vanessa said. "What you need. I'd like to see if I can find John out there anyway," Yasmine replied. "I don't want to leave without him, and he's the muscle of the group." "You think you can really outrun all of them?" I asked incredulously. "I run track." "Grace," she smiled weakly at me, "even in death, those lamos can't beat me. And if I run out of breath, I'll hide. Or maybe I might even make it out somehow and I can get help. Either way, I'm doing this. I caused this mess, so I'll take responsibility. Don't try to stop me, okay?" My eyes started to water, and I sniffed. "You don't fucking die on us, okay?" I sternly snapped at her. "We'll do this, and you'll escape with us, all right?" "All right," Yasmine leaned over to hug me tightly. Her embrace felt warm and comforting, as it always had. "I'm sorry about Bryce," Vanessa said, refusing to make eye contact, and it was clear she wasn't just talking about his loss. "Yeah," Yasmine nodded, then faced forward and took several deep breaths. She waited for Bryce to pass by her door, and before Zach could make it around, she slammed open the door and ran out. Vanessa quickly shut it behind her. All the entities stopped their creepy activities and watched her for a moment, then immediately gave chase in their respective ways. Vanessa and I held our breaths as we watched Yasmine lead them down the street, past the abandoned houses, and into the crossroads. She continued straight on, knowing it would only bring her back. "Let's go," I climbed out of the car with Vanessa, and we ran into the Eye Ripper house through the front door. There seemed to be no wraiths in sight. Not right at that moment, at least. Story 3. We went straight down to the basement and began a frantic search for the deceased victims' belongings using the flashlights we had left there before. I was in the main room with the furnace, sorting through stacks of junk. There were definitely victims everywhere, things that went unnoticed by us before, like graffiti cans someone must have brought to tag the old buildings, women's bags, wallets, etc. The amount of those types of items down there made my stomach queasy, but I kept searching. The silence cut short by the sounds of things rustling around. "Grace," from the adjacent room, I heard Vanessa whisper my name. I hurried through the doorless entryway that led to that area of the basement and shined my flashlight on Vanessa, who was leaning on the wall with her ear against it. "Come, listen," she whispered, gesturing for me to come near. I drew closer and pressed my ear over the wall, frowning. I didn't hear anything but our quiet, rhythmic breathing, so I gave her a confused look. I heard sounds in the wall. Vanessa looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. Both of us were contemplating the discovery of 3 out of the 4 children's bodies within the wall. "Probably rats," I said it stupidly. She gave me a look. "Have you seen one living thing since we've been in this mess?" I didn't say anything. Vanessa glanced over at a tall wardrobe in the corner mahogany and draped with cobwebs. She walked over to it and looked inside it. There were dusty coats inside, and she pushed them to one end, jumping as she was startled by her own reflection in a mirror that took up the whole back panel of the wardrobe's interior. Weird, I noted, shining my flashlight at it. A sound made us turn our heads behind us. An object we disturbed during our search settling in place, maybe, something dropping or shifting naturally. But when I looked back at the mirror, I saw a glimpse of the upper half of Peter's face peering over my right shoulder, only his eye sockets and brown bangs visible. I screamed and jumped back. What, Vanessa asked, shining the flashlight around to see nothing at all. I stuttered, my hand on my chest as I looked behind me and backed into the wardrobe. It slightly shook, and the mirror inside jostled out of position, a corner dropping and revealing a black crack. Wait a second, Vanessa removed the mirror to find a dark hole leading into the wall. My mouth fell open. I grabbed Vanessa's arm as she lifted her leg to go inside. What are you doing? What if it's in the wall, she whispered, shrugging me off and climbing inside. Are you coming or what? I cursed under my breath and followed her, bending low and slipping through the hole to the narrow, crumbly space between drywall. I didn't think the basement could get creepier, but somehow it did. I felt claustrophobic there, and I wanted out immediately. But I knew we needed to leave no stone unturned, so I pressed on, following behind Vanessa. We reached a dead end soon, where the back of the staircase was presumably, and our flashlight beam reflected off something shiny under some light rubble. Look, Vanessa fell to her knees and pulled bits of wall and wooden beams off of a dark gray backpack. The silver zipper had caught the light. Immediately, she zipped it open and triumphantly pulled out a sachet like the one I'd found earlier. The air was permeated with the smell of decay as soon as she revealed it, but we were too excited to care. Why am I the designated eye holder? I gripped as she gave it to me. Come on, let's look for that purse before those things get tired of chasing Yazzie. Vanessa nudged me, and I led us back the way we came. Where's the hole? I asked as I looked at the part of the wall where I was sure we had entered. The tunnel stretched on farther than we remembered, and we could hear the sounds of light footsteps as someone we couldn't see ran just up ahead. Despite this, we pressed on, hoping it was the ghost of Peter returning for his eyes. We walked and walked and walked. Oh God, Vanessa whispered as we realized we were stuck in an infinite loop behind the wall. This can't be happening, I whimpered. It seemed like a lifetime later when my flashlight beam landed on a figure crouched with his back to us. The red shirt and black hair pointed to it being Peter, and he wept softly into his hands. Peter the First said softly as Vanessa clutched onto me for dear life. We have something that belongs to you. Let us go peacefully, and you can have them. I felt a soft breath on the back of my neck and spun around, my heart jumping out of my chest. Vanessa screamed. Peter was now behind us with a grin that was impossibly wide. I looked down at his open hand, where the sachet, which I did not remember handing him, was now sitting. With that, he was silently pulled by an unseen force back into the darkness, the holes in his face looking at us the entire time. Thank God, I cried, looking behind me to see that the hole leading out of that dreadful space had appeared again. We hurriedly climbed through the wardrobe, and back into the basement. Grace Sack's voice tickled my ear. The stagnant basement air was filled with the shrill sounds of Vanessa and I's terror as we burst into a run, not even bothering to look behind us. We beelined for the stairs, Vanessa running faster than me. I was scared that she'd leave me behind like I had left Zach behind. I tried to run faster as she reached the first step. Before I did, my shoes stomping the floor so hard it shook. Then suddenly I was under the floor, my body racked with pain and the sound of wood splintering and giving way, covering up Vanessa's screams. I looked up through the hole and saw Zach crouching over me, his pale hand reaching for my face. I thrashed wildly like a caged bird and kicked him away, scrambling deeper into the hole. It was then that I realized it was a crawl space, and there was a small hatch just beyond where one of the kids' bodies was found. I hurtled through it, crawling through the claustrophobic little tunnel caked with dust and webs. It smelled like rot down there, but I hardly noticed as I tried to listen to see if I could hear Zach giving chase. I didn't hear anything, but I looked behind me anyway. I couldn't hear anything because somehow the little blonde ghost was silently scuttling after me in the crawl space instead of Zach. Her mouth hung open, a black void like her eyes. Her dirty, cracked, and bloody fingernails scraped the floor as she went. Her movements looked unnatural, like she was in sped-up footage, and my heart lurched in my ribcage. I crawled faster, hyperventilating and feeling my mind cloud with overwhelming fear. Up ahead, I spotted a dead end, but just in front of it was a hole. I allowed myself to drop through, and I felt the crisp grass and something else cushion my fall. I rolled over on my back and looked to my side to see a faded old pink clutch purse with a zipper and a bit of what looked like old blood smeared on it. I grabbed it and zipped it open as a stark white arm followed by a curtain of blonde hair slipped through the hole. A revolting stench unleashed into my nose as I pulled out another sachet and threw it at the wraith clawing her way towards me. Sarah, on all fours, stopped, stared at it, then snatched the sachet and crawled backwards lightning fast until she disappeared into nothingness. The tension in my body diminished as I was relieved of her presence. As I crawled from under the house, I wondered briefly about the crawl space, which very clearly seemed like a discreet escape route for a man who knew he was doing something terribly illegal, a way he could leave without being caught if the authorities came to his door. But if he had gone through such lengths, why did he end up killing himself and revealing his crimes? This didn't occupy my thoughts for too long as I looked out at the empty street and wondered where Vanessa was. Did she escape Zach? If so, where did she go? As if on cue, a distant scream echoed into the night, and my head snapped towards the tree behind the house on the left, which we had never explored. Realizing this was Vanessa's voice, I darted towards where I heard it, hoping beyond all hope that I could make it in time. I was not going to let her die like I had done to Zach. I weaved around the trees, my lungs on fire and my legs growing tired. "Vanessa," I called. "Where are you?" I spotted platinum blonde hair in the distance and sped up, approaching Vanessa, who was standing still and staring upward. I crashed into her, hugging her in relief that she seemed fine. I found Sarah's eyes and gave them to her. I told her breathlessly, "We just have one last pair left." I pulled back and looked at her shocked face. Finally, I followed her gaze and looked up, pointing my flashlight skyward. The eyeless corpse of what I recognized to be Lisa Waller dangled by a noose from a tree branch, cutting through the silence with the steady creaking of the rope. She was a white woman with brown hair, a tank top, shorts, and sneakers who seemed to be in her mid-20s to early 30s. I looked around, sweat falling into my eyes as I took in the sight of dozens of corpses hanging from the trees, all eyeless and all with nooses around their necks. Not only that, but there was a graveyard of cars just sitting there in the spacious gaps between the trees. I don't understand, I stuttered, recognizing the corpse of Rachel, who had killed Lisa in wraith form on video, hanging not too far away. "It's like how the eye ripper died," Vanessa whispered, facing me with eyes glossy with tears. "That's why we didn't see Bryce's corpse or Zach's. They end up hanging the bodies to mimic his death." But why, I blinked, at a loss. Vanessa shrugged, cluelessly. I decided to tell her about the crawl space. The purse was under the house. When I fell through the floor, I went through the crawl space, and there was a hole leading under there. I don't know why that sicko put it down there, but honestly, I'm more confused about why he went through the trouble of making an escape plan if he was just going to end up killing himself anyway. Maybe Vanessa considered. Maybe the killer didn't hang himself after all. Maybe he was their first victim. The curse could have started when they haunted him and pulled his eyes out, then hung his body. I mean, even the cops thought it was far-fetched for a man to hang himself after gouging his own eyes out, but they said there was no sign of foul play. So does that mean his ghost is around here somewhere? The thought was chilling to me. I don't know. Vanessa looked at me, the same apprehension on her face. "Hey, that video we watched earlier. Lisa said William's parents were part of the occult, and that's why she thinks he's responsible. Witches or something, I guess. When he killed William last, the curse started. We don't even know how to find his eyes." I felt hopeless all of a sudden. He didn't go missing with something like the others did. "Wait a minute," Vanessa looked thoughtful. "That woman said that he had actually escaped from the basement at one point, but the killer chased him down and got him. I wonder if it was these woods. And that's why they put the bodies up here." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Look, what are you getting at?" I think William's eyes are out here," Vanessa replied. "I just have this feeling." "Are you serious? That'll take forever." I wiped the grime and dust off my glasses. "Do you have somewhere to be?" I huffed at her sarcastic response. The two of us started to meander, unable to look away from the hanging corpses as we did. I thought I heard a whisper, but when I looked around, I saw nothing. I worried we weren't alone out here. I unclipped my walkie and decided to see if John or Yasmine would answer hello. "Are you guys alive?" There was nothing but static. Vanessa filmed the hanging bodies, and I thought that was distasteful but remained silent. I heard a twig snap and looked over my shoulder, seeing an arm retract behind a tree. Before I could voice my concerns, Vanessa screamed up ahead. The body of John was hanging, eyes missing, and dark skin a ghoulish gray from lack of blood flow. I remember it just like it was yesterday, the feeling of great loss hitting me like a punch to the gut. Aside from Yasmine, he was the nicest to me out of everyone, and every time I try to recall one of his charming smiles or the way he would laugh at his own jokes, the visage of his dead face is smeared all over those memories. I kneeled next to Vanessa, who was sobbing in a heap on the ground, and wordlessly pulled her to her feet so we could run from the entity watching us. She didn't even question it as I dragged her along. She just clutched me and wept. Suddenly, both our walkies crackled to life, scaring the crap out of us both, but the fear was replaced with relief as Yasmine's voice came through. "Are you all alive still?" "I'm back, but I can't find anyone." Yaz, we're in the woods, I frantically all but yelled into the walkie-talkie as Vanessa went over to retch and dry heave next to a tree. There's bodies hanging everywhere. They're the people who were killed in this place. What the fuck? And oh God, John is up there. Too, my voice shook as I broke the bad news. He's dead. They got him. Yasmine cursed up a storm over the walkie, covering her grief with anger. And I interrupted her, knowing we had little time to spare. We only have one last kid left. Vanessa thinks his eyes are out here, but you need to come help us look. We're in the woods behind that house you were looking at earlier. It was maybe 10 minutes before she found us, during which Vanessa and I had hid in a large tree hollow, as we heard footsteps crushing sticks and leaves all around us. Someone knows something was following us and being eerily stealthy about it, and it could have been more than one. We were shivering within the hole in the rotting bark when we heard her call out, and we crawled out to meet her. Why were you hiding? Yasmine looked pale and exhausted as she regarded us. I had no doubt we looked similar. There's things all around here. They've been following us, Vanessa whispered, putting a finger to her lips. They haven't tried attacking yet, which is somehow creepier than if they did, I added as I glanced around us in paranoia. But let's not wait until they do. Let's find this kid's eyes so we can leave this horrible fucking place behind. What's that? Yasmine pointed to the tree hollow where we had hid. The opening began at the ground, looking almost like a semicircle door to some elfin house. She pointed at something we didn't notice in our panic to find a hiding place from our pursuers, something that was sticking out of the ground a bit. It was white and thin. I bent down and inspected it, realizing it was a shoelace. I tugged it, and a moss-covered shoe broke loose from a pile of fallen leaves, acorn shells, twigs, and dirt. Vanessa gasped from behind me. It's Williams. His body was recovered from the basement, missing his shoe. You told me he didn't go missing with anything, I frowned. No, Grace, he didn't go missing without a shoe, she corrected me irritably. He was found dead without it. The pieces of the puzzle connected in my head. That woman on the video said he escaped the basement, ran into the woods, but ultimately got found and caught by the killer. I looked in the shoe to be sure the sachet wasn't inside, and to my great disappointment, it wasn't. Yeah, Vanessa nodded. It's a part of the story that's sort of hard to find, but I remember listening to a podcast, and they said he actually admitted that in his letter. The note he left behind was really long and full of weird perverted stuff. Not all of it was released. He hid in here, I revealed, gesturing to the tree hollow after dropping the shoe, and he was caught, and in the struggle his shoe fell off. Vanessa started filming again, pointing the camera at the tree. This is almost out of battery, but I need to get this shot. Hey, what's that? Yasmine and I followed her gaze. She had the camera pointing upwards. I shut my eyes, not seeing anything. Look at that branch, under the one with the old bird's nest, Vanessa instructed, pointing with her free hand. Finally, my eyes landed on it. A sachet, tied by the little rope holding it closed to a twig sticking out of the branch. It's his eyes, I cried. He put them in the tree. The depravity of the eye ripper astounded me. The tree reminded him of where he had found the little boy. The chase must have been a rush for him. Aside from the fear of being caught, I imagined the sick pleasure he could have felt once he caught and killed him, using the tree as his own twisted memorial where he would place part of the boy's remains to remind him of his gruesome crime. Hold this. Vanessa shoved the camcorder in my hands and immediately got to work scaling the oak like an overgrown monkey. Yasmine and I watched her, antsy. A little snicker caught our attention, and we looked behind us. I immediately recognized Rachel's eyeless face, cracked by a wicked red painted smile that slashed across her cheeks like a scar as she peeked around a tree. Vanessa, hurry, I screamed. She looked down at the apparition slowly advancing on us and scrambled towards the hanging sachet. I grabbed Yasmine's arm and pulled her back, but stopped in my tracks when I heard footsteps approaching from behind. I turned, and there was an unfamiliar man, the spirit of another eyeless victim. Then came another, emerging from the trees, and another, a young teenage boy, and another, a woman in a police uniform. They wore different expressions, some of their expressions vacant, some smiling dementedly, some frozen in a silent scream, some twisted into a picture of perpetual misery with bloody tears and an upside-down smile that lengthened their jaw more than humanly possible. Go back to the house and lock the door, Vanessa yelled, her fingers outstretched towards the sachet as she straddled a branch. I'll meet you there. The palm of Yasmine and I's hand seemed glued together with sweat as we ran in between the eyeless wraiths, back towards where we could see that street in the distance. They extended their arms towards us, fingers grasping for our eyes, an unsettling chorus of pained moans, deranged laughter, unintelligible whispers, and furious yelling erupted all around us from the entities as we narrowly escaped with our lives. The next account of this experience will be the last one, and unfortunately, it'll get worse before it gets better.